In this 1898 family portrait, the mother's glove conceals a dark secret. Antique appraiser Rachel Morrison had attended hundreds of estate sales throughout her career, but the Pemberton Manor sale in the Cotswolds felt different. The October morning mist clung to the honey-colored stone walls of the 17th century manor as she examined items in the drawing room. Rain pelted the mullioned windows, creating an almost melancholic atmosphere. Among the Victorian furniture and family heirlooms, Rachel's attention was drawn to a large framed photograph on the mantelpiece. The sepia-toned portrait showed the Pemberton family in their formal Victorian splendor, dated 1898. Lord Reginald Pemberton stood proudly behind his seated wife, Lady Charlotte, while their 4 children, 3 daughters and a young son, were arranged beside them. What struck Rachel immediately was Lady Charlotte's posture. While the rest of the family appeared relaxed within the formal constraints of Victorian photography, the matriarch sat rigidly, her left hand prominently positioned on her lap, covered by an elegant black lace glove. Her right hand was bare, displaying expensive rings, but the gloved left hand seemed deliberately emphasized. Rachel lifted her magnifying loupe for a closer look. Something about the glove's shape seemed odd. There appeared to be an unusual bulge or deformity beneath the delicate lace. The expression on Lady Charlotte's face was haunting too, her eyes holding a sadness that seemed at odds with the family's apparent prosperity. Rachel purchased the photograph along with several other pieces, intrigued by what she'd observed. Back in her London workshop, she placed the portrait under her professional examination lamp and studied it with high-powered magnification equipment used for authenticating antique items. The asymmetry between Lady Charlotte's hands was unmistakable. The bare right hand appeared normal, elegant and well-formed, but the gloved left hand showed a distinctly unnatural shape. The glove seemed to be concealing something beneath, perhaps a deformity or injury that the family had carefully hidden from public view. Rachel began researching Victorian photography customs. During the 1890s, it was common for wealthy families to commission formal portraits, and these were often carefully staged to present the most favorable image possible. Any physical imperfections were typically concealed or minimized through strategic positioning and clothing. But as she examined the photograph more closely, Rachel noticed something else troubling. The children's expressions, while formally composed, showed subtle signs of distress. The eldest daughter's eyes appeared puffy, as if she'd been crying recently. The young son kept glancing toward his mother's gloved hand, with what seemed like apprehension. Most unsettling was a small dark stain on Lady Charlotte's white dress sleeve, just above the wrist of her gloved hand. The stain appeared fresh, as if something had recently dripped onto the fabric. Rachel's experience with historical artifacts told her this might be significant evidence of something the family had desperately tried to hide. Rachel spent the following day at the British Library, researching the Pemberton family lineage. Lord Reginald Pemberton had been a successful textile manufacturer, owner of several mills in Manchester. The family had risen from middle-class origins to considerable wealth during the Industrial Revolution, eventually purchasing their Cotswolds estate in 1885. Lady Charlotte Pemberton, née Whitmore, had married into the family in 1878. Her background was more mysterious. She appeared to have no recorded family history before her marriage, which was unusual for someone marrying into such prominence. Victorian society was typically obsessed with genealogy and social standing. The most disturbing discovery came in local newspaper archives. Rachel found a series of articles from the Gloucester Echo, dated between 1896 and 1899, reporting on a string of unexplained accidents involving household staff at Pemberton Manor. 3 different maids had suffered mysterious injuries to their hands and arms, all requiring medical treatment. 2 had resigned abruptly, citing unsafe working conditions. One article, dated March 1898, just months before the family portrait was taken, reported that a young scullery maid named Mary Fitzgerald had been found unconscious in the manor's kitchen with severe burns on both hands. The official explanation was an unfortunate accident with boiling water, but Mary had apparently told the local physician that her injuries weren't from water at all. Mary Fitzgerald had died 3 weeks later from infection, and her family had been compensated with an unusually large sum of money for their silence. Determined to uncover the truth, Rachel contacted Dr. James Whitfield, a local historian who specialized in Victorian medical records. His great-grandfather had been the village physician in the 1890s and had kept detailed patient notes which had been preserved in the family archives. "Doctor," Whitfield met Rachel at a tea shop in Chipping, Campden, carrying a leather-bound journal filled with his ancestors' careful handwriting. "My great-grandfather was very thorough," he explained, opening the journal to entries from 1898. "He documented everything, even when families preferred discretion." The entries about the Pemberton household staff were deeply troubling. The physician had treated multiple servants for what he described as chemical burns of unknown origin, always involving the hands and arms. His notes suggested these were not accidents, but deliberate injuries inflicted by someone with access to caustic substances. Most revealing was an entry dated September 15, 1898. "Called to Pemberton Manor to examine Lady Charlotte's hand. Strange injury beneath her glove. Appears to be self-inflicted burn, possibly from acid or lye. Patient refuses to explain cause, claims accident while gardening. Children present seemed frightened. Advised immediate medical attention, but Lady Charlotte insisted on treating wound herself. Most concerning case I've encountered." Dr. Whitfield looked up gravely. "My great-grandfather believed Lady Charlotte was deliberately injuring herself and others, but he could never prove it, and the family's influence prevented any official investigation. The timing of this injury, just before their family portrait, suggests she was trying to hide evidence of her actions." Rachel's research took her to the records of Pemberton Industries, the family's textile business. In the company archives, housed at the Manchester Industrial Heritage Centre, she discovered that Lord Reginald's Mills had been experimenting with new chemical processes for fabric dyeing and treatment in the 1890s. Among the business correspondence, she found invoices for large quantities of sulfuric acid, sodium hydroxide, and other caustic chemicals delivered directly to Pemberton Manor, not the mills. The quantities were far beyond what would be needed for normal household purposes like cleaning or laundry. A letter from a chemical supplier, dated June 1898, raised red flags. "Lord Pemberton, we must express concern about the repeated orders for concentrated acids delivered to your private residence. Our liability insurance requires us to inquire about the intended use of these substances, particularly given their dangerous nature when handled improperly." Rachel also found staff employment records showing an unusually high turnover rate among household servants between 1896 and 1899. Most telling were the resignation letters, many of which cited concerns about working conditions and fear for personal safety. Several mentioned that Lady Charlotte had taken to spending long hours in the manor's basement, which had been converted into what she called her chemical laboratory. The pieces were forming a horrifying picture. Lady Charlotte Pemberton had been using her husband's access to industrial chemicals to conduct sadistic experiments on the household staff, with her own hand injury being either an accident during these activities or a deliberate self-inflicted wound to test her methods. Armed with her research, Rachel contacted the current owners of Pemberton Manor, now a luxury hotel. The manager, Mrs. Elizabeth Davies, was fascinated by the historical investigation and agreed to show Rachel the basement areas of the building. The basement had been modernized for hotel use, but original Victorian features remained. In what had once been the wine cellar, Mrs. Davies pointed out unusual staining on the stone walls and floor, dark patches that had resisted decades of cleaning attempts. Previous owners mentioned finding strange equipment down here during renovations in the 1960s, Mrs. Davies explained. Glass vessels, metal instruments, things that seemed more suited to a laboratory than a wine cellar. Everything was thrown away, unfortunately. But Rachel's trained eye spotted something the renovators had missed. Behind a newer partition wall, she found scratches in the stone that appeared to be initials, CP 1898, followed by what looked like tally marks, dozens of small scratches grouped in sets of 5. Most chilling was a section of wall where the stones showed evidence of acid damage, creating pockmarks and discoloration. The pattern suggested repeated splashing or deliberate application of corrosive substances. Rachel photographed everything, her hands trembling as she realized she was standing in what had likely been Lady Charlotte's torture chamber. Hidden in a crevice between stones, Rachel discovered a small glass vial, overlooked for over a century. Though empty, residue analysis would later confirm it had once contained concentrated sulfuric acid, the same chemical that had likely caused the injuries to the household staff and Lady Charlotte's own gloved hand. Rachel's investigation led her to the descendants of the Pemberton household staff. Through church records and local genealogy groups, she traced the families of several servants who had worked at the manor during the 1890s. What she discovered, painted a picture of systematic abuse that had been covered up by wealth and social influence. Mary Fitzgerald's great-granddaughter, Sarah Murphy, still lived in the village. She possessed letters that Mary had written to her sister before her death, describing her experiences at Pemberton Manor. The letters had been kept secret for generations, the family too frightened of the Pemberton name to speak publicly. Aunt Mary wrote that Lady Charlotte would call her to the basement under the pretense of cleaning or organizing, Sarah explained, holding the fragile letters with shaking hands. But once down there, terrible things would happen. Lady Charlotte would force the servants to put their hands in bowls of liquid that burned like fire. She claimed she was testing cleaning solutions, but Mary knew it was deliberate cruelty. Another letter described Lady Charlotte's behavior. The mistress takes pleasure in our pain. She watches our faces as the burning begins, and I swear I see satisfaction in her eyes. She makes notes in a book about how long we can endure the pain before crying out. Yesterday she burned herself with the same liquid just to see if she could bear it longer than I could. The final letter, written just days before Mary's death, was the most haunting. I fear I will not survive much longer. The infection from my burns grows worse daily, and Lady Charlotte refuses to allow proper medical treatment. She says the pain is necessary for scientific understanding. I pray someone will one day expose her wickedness. Rachel shared Mary Fitzgerald's letters with Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic pathologist who specialized in historical cases. Dr. Chen's analysis of the described injuries and symptoms painted a clear picture of systematic torture disguised as household accidents. The pattern described in these letters is consistent with deliberate chemical burns, Dr. Chen explained in her London office. The progression of Mary's infections suggests her wounds were repeatedly contaminated, possibly by forcing her to continue working with damaged hands. Lady Charlotte appears to have been conducting sadistic experiments on pain tolerance and wound healing. Dr. Chen examined high-resolution photographs of the family portrait, focusing on Lady Charlotte's gloved hand. The bulge beneath the glove is consistent with severe scarring from acid burns. The way she's positioned her hand suggests she's hiding significant disfigurement, likely self-inflicted to test her own pain tolerance against that of her victims. The forensic expert also noted subtle details Rachel had missed. Tiny specks on Lady Charlotte's dress that appeared to be burn holes from acid splashes, and a slight discoloration on her right hand that suggested recent chemical exposure. This woman was clearly suffering from what we would now recognize as sadistic personality disorder, Dr. Chen concluded. She derived pleasure from inflicting pain and used her social position to avoid consequences. The family portrait was taken shortly after her own injury, possibly as a way to create a normal image, before the evidence of her activities became too obvious to hide. The glove wasn't just concealing a physical injury, it was hiding the evidence of Lady Charlotte's true nature as a serial torturer. Rachel's final breakthrough came when she discovered correspondence between Lord Reginald Pemberton and his solicitor, found in the legal firm's archives. The letters, dated late 1898, revealed that Lord Reginald had become aware of his wife's activities and was desperately trying to contain the scandal. "My wife's condition has deteriorated beyond my ability to manage," he wrote to his lawyer. "The household staff live in terror, and I fear her experiments will eventually result in a death that cannot be explained away. I have consulted with Dr. Morrison about possible treatments for her mental affliction, but she refuses all help." The solicitor's reply was equally revealing. "Given the recent death of the Fitzgerald girl and the inquiries from her family, I strongly advise removing Lady Charlotte from the household immediately. The payments to the victims' families have been substantial, but our ability to maintain silence is limited. Consider an extended stay at a private sanitarium." But Lord Reginald's subsequent letters showed his unwillingness to institutionalize his wife, fearing the social scandal. Instead, he chose to relocate the entire family to their London residence and sell Pemberton Manor, claiming Charlotte's health required a change of climate. The family portrait, Rachel realized, had been taken as a final formal image before their hasty departure from the Cotswolds. Lady Charlotte's gloved hand was hiding not just her physical scars, but the evidence of crimes that would have destroyed the family's reputation forever. The dark secret beneath the glove represented a systematic campaign of torture that had been covered up by wealth, privilege, and Victorian society's willingness to ignore the suffering of servants. 6 months after her discovery, Rachel stood before a packed auditorium at the National Archives, presenting her findings about Lady Charlotte Pemberton and the dark secret hidden beneath her glove. The family portrait, now properly contextualized, served as evidence of one of Victorian England's most successfully concealed serial abuse cases. Sarah Murphy, Mary Fitzgerald's great-granddaughter, sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face as Rachel revealed the truth about her ancestor's death. For over a century, our family carried the shame of Mary's supposed clumsiness with kitchen accidents, she said afterward. To finally know the truth, that she was murdered by her employer, brings both pain and relief. The Pemberton Manor Hotel agreed to install a memorial plaque honoring Mary Fitzgerald and the other victims, ensuring their suffering would not be forgotten. The basement where Lady Charlotte conducted her experiments was converted into a small museum documenting the hidden lives of Victorian domestic servants. Dr. Chen published a medical paper analyzing the case, contributing to understanding of historical serial abuse patterns. Rachel's investigation had uncovered not just one woman's crimes, but the systematic way Victorian society protected the wealthy while ignoring the suffering of the powerless. As Rachel looked at the family portrait one final time before it was donated to the museum, she reflected on how a single detail, an elegant glove concealing horrific scars, had revealed a truth hidden for over a century. Lady Charlotte's dark secret was finally exposed, bringing justice to victims whose voices had been silenced by class, money, and society's willingness to look away from inconvenient truths. The glove had hidden more than physical damage. It had concealed a monster,